There you go. I think we'll probably see people filtering in for a few minutes, but let's just start by settling down with some quiet gazing for about 2 minutes. I'm just going to gaze with my camera. You can gaze with me, or if it feels good to you, close your eyes if you'd like. Hang on. Yeah. So to those of you who just showed up, we're going to start with 2 minutes of gazing, and then we'll get into some talking. Okay. Okay. So thanks again for coming and joining. I'm going to view people who are coming. Okay. So let me get this out of the way so I can see my notes. Okay. So what I'd like to do today is share with you all some of my personal observations about personal and consciousness development beyond whole being realization. And I should say at the outset that this is not official Dharma. I mean, it's a little bit of it is official Dharma, but I'm just going to present it as my observations, and that way we won't have any, hopefully we don't have any major complaints. Many of you know I started in Waking Down back in the mid-90s, and was very involved in teaching, became a senior teacher, and helped a lot of people and set up a lot of systems, and helped set up mentor and teacher training and the foundation course. And after doing many years of teaching work in this context, approximately 6 years ago, I felt a need to step away from the work and take some dedicated time out, which turned out to be about 5 years, to investigate the very question I want to talk about today, which is, what is beyond whole being realization? What does it mean to grow in the various parts of ourselves beyond that particular stage of the process? Also, I was investigating what happens up to that. What's in common between people in their growth and realization process up to whole being realization. But today we're just focusing on from whole being realization on up. So the big questions that I stepped away with some years back were, what are the aspects of our being that awaken? Do all aspects of who we are awaken in everyone? What does that look like? What does that mean? If someone awakens as consciousness, can they still be unawake in other areas, like unawake to their impact on others, unawake in their emotions, unawake into their parts of their body, things like that. What's the role of personal uniqueness in the awakening process? And how do we distinguish what's common among advanced awakening stages and what experiences are unique to that particular person? I think these are, to me, that's a really interesting question because I think this world is increasingly filled with people who have some kind of realization and speak with confidence about what it is they've realized and what they think people grow into. But I think it's a little harder to step back and look at all that and say what's in common and what's unique. So, okay, enough on that. Here are the reasons that I want to share this, my observations of this with you. Mostly it's because my purpose is to help millions of people awaken. And it seems to me that the best way I can do that, or one of the best ways I can do that, is to make super clear what awakening is actually about. And make it clear enough that people who are not even coming from a spiritual mindset can get it. That's my hope. I'm sure I'll be using some spiritual language today with you because you all are, sharing this kind of Trillium awakening language with me. But part of my purpose is to make this as simple and easy to understand as possible so that we can help, especially through technology, not only through coaching and teaching work, such as we do in Trillium, but also through technology to help the world awaken as quickly as possible. That's my purpose. And making it clear is part of my purpose. And I think that once we understand simple things like the 5 domains, which I'll talk about in a moment, as part of the iConscious model, it makes it easier to understand what's going on because then we understand that some people advance more rapidly in some domains and less rapidly in other domains. And there's some gaps, some differentials there that help us understand that, yeah, it is possible for people to have certain kinds of advanced realizations on one level and be sort of held back by unfinished business on other levels. So first, let me say a little bit about the limits of models, because I think this is an important consideration. I want you to understand that I understand the limits of models and that we all need to understand the limits of models. I think models are a very important way to help us sort of classify things so that we have a way of thinking about them. But I'm sure we've all noticed that when we get too hung up on the classifications, the black and the whites of things, we miss the gray zones. And if anything is gray and quantum, it's the awakening process. And especially once we get to whole being realization and beyond, it's a very fuzzy quantum process. People have experiences of stages that are much further ahead than where they are right now on average, their center of gravity. And they also have experiences that are very much expressions of their own personal uniqueness. And so I think it's important that we all understand that I'm not intending to present a model that really thinks of itself as a grid. I'm just stepping back and saying the grid shows averages and it shows words that describe averages. So that's basically how I'm holding it. It's always going to be partial. There's no model that's ever going to really clearly express everybody's process or any one particular person's process. Yeah. But what's good about models is that they organize our understandings. They're kind of like maps. And I think we've all had the experience of living through our life in the stage when before we have digital maps on our devices, and we often may have been challenged in trying to figure out where we're going or how to get there. And that is exactly what the iConscious model is about, the model that I created with my colleague, Dr. Griggs, at iConscious.global. But I'm just going to talk in the language that is as common as possible to Trillium Awakening. So actually, I think what I'd like to do is just give you a quick overview of just the stages that we're going to be talking about today. And okay, here we go. And just to be safe, I'm going to share this screen. Yeah. Okay, so this is just a simplified thing that shows the 6 stages that I'll be talking about today. First is embodied unity, which is the exact correlation with whole being realization in Trillium language. That's stage 9 in the iConscious model. And the description says non-separate realization brings wholeness, wellness, and presence. Stage 10 is called transforming here, and this translates in Trillium language to the wake down, shakedown. This is basically a sort of purification of our system, a realigning of our whole being to what we've realized as the fundamental wholeness that we are, and yet we also become aware of the fact that our patterns and conditionings and tendencies may not have us acting or responding in life the way that would be fully aligned with what we realized, the kind of wholeness that we've realized. We may still be functioning as if we're separate. And in fact, I think everybody has that experience. And the description there is core duality-based conditioning surfaces for healing. Then there's stage 11, which I call individuating. Fundamentally untangled and liberated into life. In other words, once we have done enough transforming, we suddenly start feeling free. And the question comes up, oh, wow, I'm free. Now what? So that becomes the big question. So we'll talk about that. Stage 12, I call living potential. Serving from alignment of purpose and power. In other words, we learn that it's okay to have power. And what matters is to use our power to serve our personal purpose in life. And we learn to get over, not say get over, but get beyond being stopped by our fears and do what we're here to do and be. When we move from stage 12 to stage 13, we're switching from the unified phase of life into the singular phase. The phase that's not on the model right now showing in front of you is called dual. It's the duality phase in which we're fundamentally seeing life in pieces and parts, and we haven't yet figured out how these pieces fit together and how they are part of a unified whole. But once we get to whole being realization, that realization dawns and we're in this new unified phase. The unified phase can be thought of as a connector, a transition between the duality phase and the singular phase. We realize the wholeness that ties everything, including ourselves and the whole universe together. But like I said, we also realize we're not living that in a way that feels entirely aligned with the realization of wholeness. We're still operating as if we're separate, as if other people are separate, as if higher self and lower self are separate, things like that. And so in a way, the whole unified phase, from my perspective, is a transition from seeing the world in parts and dualities and polarities to being so absolutely unified with the world that there's nothing, one way to say it is that there's nothing holding us back anymore from trying to control it, from trying to make life be the way we want it to be. There's no longer a part of self that wants to make itself separate for the sake of controlling the other parts of ourselves. And when that happens, we enter the singular phase, the first part of which is singular realization. Some people, by the way, refer to this as no self. it's, language around spiritual realization is tricky because people can have all kinds of types of no self-realization. Here I'm specifically referring to a type of realization that can only happen once you have gone through embodied awakening, whole being realization. Some people who are not disposed well toward fully embracing the body and its human challenges and issues and concerns may get to some version of a no self-realization, but it would not be this. The description here is dissolution of subject-object perspective. We'll talk more about what that means. And then stage 14 is flow, life and fluid motion. I'll describe more about that. And you see here, 15 says unknown, ongoing evolution, meaning that's just my way of saying there's no end to the process. There's, evolution has never stopped in the history of the universe, as far as I can tell. And so, as far as I can tell, personal evolution never stops either. And so, instead of saying this is the highest, level of realization that's reachable, I'm going to say the opposite. There is no such thing. People will keep evolving, and as soon as I can observe enough cases of people describing experience that go beyond stage 14, as we'll be talking about, I'll be the first one to say, okay, I think I can give a name and a description to stage 15, and then 16 will become unknown. So that's the territory I want to cover. And actually, I'll just briefly mention the 5 domains. And let's see if I have that up. No, let's not even go there. I'm going to stop sharing. I'll just describe it. The first domains, for those of you who are familiar with Ken Wilber, you could think of these as lines of development, or you could just think of these as aspects of our being that are developing. The first one is consciousness, the part of us that registers our human experience. The second part is uniqueness. It's not the part. It's like our whole being is unique. But uniqueness is an important consideration for everybody, because there's a lot of people who got the message that their uniqueness was not welcome, and that somehow their uniqueness suppresses spiritual development. Like, this isn't about you and your ego. This is about letting go of all that stuff and just becoming one with the great white oneness. And I'm here to say, gosh, I don't think so. I mean, yes, you can have that realization of the great oneness, but in no way is that going to suppress or turn down your uniqueness. In fact, quite the opposite. It will do exactly the opposite. The more you realize consciousness, the more aware you are of who you uniquely are and what you're here to be and do. And the reverse is also true. The more you attend to your uniqueness and embrace it, the faster you get into unity, because if you're rejecting your own uniqueness, you're still at war with yourself. That's not unity. That's the opposite of unity. That goes in the wrong direction. So then the third domain is mind. And we're all aware of mind. I just define that as thoughts and mental activity and symbolic processing. And mind is a very, very important part of our life. We all experience it to be a major part of our life. And as we evolve, by the way, the iConscious model describes how all 14 stages happen in each of these 5 domains. And there's a book. You can go check out the book on the iConscious on the iConscious.global website. We're pretty much giving the book away for free. I would recommend that. But as far as mind goes, what happens is we basically go from using our mind in all kinds of inappropriate ways, including to think it's who we are, thinking we are our thoughts. That is not the whole truth. And using our mind to make decisions, which I think is also not very helpful. The mind is good at showing us stuff, but the mind isn't the decider. To eventually getting to the place where we realize how beautiful our mind is and we realize how to use it in ways that just help us. And we only use it when it helps us. The rest of the time, who cares? We can let it go. And eventually we get to a place where we transcend the narrative self, this sense of self that we have from constantly engaging our mind. That would be in stage 13 and 14 on this model. The next domain is emotions. We evolve from thinking there's something wrong with what we're feeling to realizing there's nothing wrong with what we're feeling, and that what our feelings do is tell us what matters to us, what works for us, what doesn't work for us, and who we are. It tells us who we are. So eventually we get to a full embrace of our emotions and we learn to flow with them. We eventually learn to, even though emotions aren't all universally fun and groovy, we eventually get to a place where we are so embracing of our emotions and so surrendered into whatever they wish to bring to us that there's no resistance left. And when there's no resistance left, there's no separate self left, because that's what the separate self was all about, was resisting and trying to control. And then there's the body domain. And the body domain, we move from thinking that our body is getting in our way and trying to whip it into shape to eventually realizing that it's like one of the greatest gifts we could ever have, and embracing it, including the body's unique challenges, strengths, and weaknesses and challenges. And eventually to the same surrender into accepting that we are unique and in many ways very fragile in our physical bodies. We can be very strong, but it doesn't take much to make a big dent in our physical reality. And we eventually completely accept this to the point where we are absolutely happy and fine to live whatever this body needs to live and not try to be constantly trying to control it. In fact, not trying to control it at all. Doesn't mean we don't like do the things we need to maintain our healthy existence here. There are some controls needed, but nothing overboard beyond that, basically. So that's really, I think, at the moment, all I want to say about the 5 domains. These are all aspects of our being that we need to consider and make sure we're attending to. If we decide that one of these domains in our existence is too problematic to deal with, or we've got too many negative associations with it, and we'd rather not deal with it, and we just want to move on with the other domains, I totally understand. This is how I personally tried to go about my consciousness realization from the time I was about 15 till the time I was about 41. It didn't work. It just didn't work. I kept having these blowout consciousness things from doing all these practices. And I kept being dragged into my body and into my relationship issues and into the ways that I get tangled up in my head. And it just did not give me what I wanted. So I eventually realized I have to give my attention to these other things. I have to leave the spiritual work that I was involved in for that whole time and go ahead and venturing out into other forms of work that were more about my body, my mind, my relationships, my emotions. And then when I got involved in Waking Down and then Trillium, wow, what a difference. It's like all of a sudden, attending to all of these things is the thing. And very appropriately so. Suddenly I started having massive shifts that weren't happening before because the bungee effect kept pulling me back to the parts of myself I was ignoring. So instead, I learned to lean in, embrace these parts that as an Enneagram Type 7, I hated limits. I hated anything that would make me feel anything but free. And so I would just run away from that stuff until I finally got to the moment in my life where I suddenly realized that I felt like I was always in the bleachers, never on the playing field. I was always sort of observing, never fully engaged. And I suddenly had this incredibly powerful desire to be fully on earth, to be fully in my body, to be fully engaged with people in life and and even pain, which is sort of the opposite of the conditioning for my type. The instant I had that powerful desire, I fell into whole being realization. And most people, I mean, this is not how it is for most people. Most people go much more gradually and sustainably toward the next stage of their realization. And I strongly encourage that because it's much more sustainable. My process was always kind of like a seesaw, and that's much harder to deal with, I think. But for me, that's how it happened. And then I started realizing, well, wow, if by leaning into the feeling of the core wound, it could drop me into such a massive shift in my whole being. What happens if I lean into other kinds of pains and discomfort and things I don't like? And that disposition helped me deeply go through the next stage. So I think what I'll do, let me get down to other parts of my notes. And you know what? I think I'm going to have to just keep talking and then I'll stop for questions. It's going to be hard for me to see everybody on one screen, but I'll talk for a little bit and then I'll stop for some questions. Let's see here. So going back to stage 9, just so that we have a starting point for this whole consideration. Embodied unity. A quote about this is, "Form is emptiness, emptiness is form," attributed to the Buddha. Yeah, that's perfect. I don't know that I could come up with a better quote, because that's part of what the realization is. It's this realization not only that the emptiness of beingness itself, I mean, in Buddhist language, they tend to view it as emptiness, but some people experience that as fullness. But in any case, it's non-manifest. It's, yeah, you could say that level is undifferentiated. Form is emptiness, emptiness is form, meaning embodied life, this human personal life, is just as much the divine infinite formlessness as the formlessness on its own level. How could that be? Well, it can only be if they're the same thing. So I'm here to say they're the same thing. They don't necessarily always appear to be the same thing. And in a funny sort of way, the whole journey of human awakening is all about that recognition. Because we start out often having flashes of the realization of consciousness or infinity, and it seems at first to be something other than this human life. But through Trillium kind of work, we start to realize it's just part of who we are. It's always been there. And the appearance of that being somehow separate from our human life is just an appearance. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about identities, needs. Yeah, identities, needs, and the transition to the next stage. So the old identity prior to whole being realization can be things like, I'm a separate person with my house and my car and my relationships and my job and whatever it is we think we are that may exclude deeper or more universal parts of ourselves. So before whole being realization, most people never have an identity that gets beyond the material, although some people do go after consciousness and have consciousness realizations that are so powerful that it makes them feel like, oh, this is who I truly am. The real truth here is that I'm this infinite consciousness. And the human stuff wasn't actually real. To me, that's prior to whole being realization, because that's still parts, that's still partial. We're still rejecting parts of who we are. So when we come into whole being realization, we then land into an identity that's something more like I am, oh, how did I put it? Everything, nothing, and me. The whole universe, the nothingness, and my personal self. There's some kind of an identity like that when we get to whole being realization. Yeah. Okay. Needs at this stage, which is stage 9 in my model. Um, the first need is to register the shift and to own it and claim it. That's a hard one for a lot of people because it seems like the only people who are allowed to claim something like that are the great gurus who sit on stages. But of course, the whole point of this work is to turn that upside down and to help everybody who comes in to come to these deep and beautiful and traditionally rare realizations for themselves. That's what it's all about. It's not about studying this so you can keep aspiring to it. That is not the point. The point is we're trying to help you get to it and be and way beyond that as well. So that means at some point when the shift happens, there's going to be this challenge of, oh gosh, how do I claim this without looking egoic? Or without having to go through a massive reorientation around who I think I am and who I think other people think I am and who other people think I am and how they're going to treat me if I start talking about it. We can talk more about that if there's time, but I just want to say that this is an important issue to grapple with. If you are such a person or you know such a person who's had a big shift but is shying away from owning it or claiming it, um, you might want to encourage them to talk with a teacher about that very issue. Because until it's claimed, it's a bit of a, the old language for this was second birth, which is, the language of that can be quite problematic depending on what other spiritual traditions you're coming from or even religious traditions. So now it's called whole being realization. But when it was called second birth, you could think of it as sort of a stillborn second birth. If you come into it, but you can't claim what's true for you or express yourself in the world about what you've realized is true, there's a kind of a stop there on how much further you can go. Yeah, which is a piece that's sort of leaning toward mutuality. I wasn't going to do a whole thing about that today, but I just want to point this out. To whatever degree we feel we don't know how to bring ourselves forward into relationships and be truthful about who we are, we're going to have a hard time moving forward, even in conscious, on any level you want to think about in the personal development process. Because there's a part of our being that's basically sitting back going, well, if I can't really be here, what's the point of being here? Why should I fully, even more deeply get here if I can't be who I am? I think that's a key piece. So that's why mutuality is so incredibly important. We have to learn how to bring our truth forward. And if we're having big troubles with that, yeah, let's talk with a teacher about it and get some help. Because it's a huge part of what this work is. Okay, so that's a need. To realize that this shift has happened and to get some kind of outside confirmation is another way to think about it. Some people say, well, I know this big shift happened. Why do I need someone else's confirmation? To which I would say, you know a big shift happens, but you don't necessarily know what big shift happened, right? Only people who have been past that shift can look back and know and be able to find language in common with somebody to help them understand what shift they have gone through. And I think it's also, it's sort of part of the group initiation to find yourself being welcomed as an awakened realizer into this stage of life. Yeah, I sort of imagine that in old traditions, old religious traditions, things like confirmation would have been about that until it became about other things. But I think that socially, this is a very important thing to have your level of awakening recognized by others and to be able to talk about it. Okay, so transition from stage 9 to stage 10, which is um, awakening. Sorry, it's either you could think of it as shakedown or transforming is the word that we have put on it. Once you've had this stable unity recognition and you've learned to claim it and come forth and speak your truth from that place, you will start to notice the ways in which your own conditioning was based on the old duality-based worldview. You will find yourself doing things that are not very considerate of yourself or of others, uh, things that are based in assumptions of separateness, such as how we transact with other people. I mean, again, a tiny example for me is there's a part of me that used to do business transactions in an attempt to get the best deal, ignoring the fact that this other person is part of me. And if they walk away feeling cheated or somehow not fully honored for their contribution in a project, I will feel that too. It will impact me. It will impact the world. I have just, in trying to just get a good deal and not take care of everybody involved, I have cheated myself, the other, and the world out of what could have been more love uh, that we are each generating or not based on our conditioning and our ability to live the realization that everything is part of the same one loving reality is one way to say it. So once we start recognizing and allowing ourselves to get feedback about how we're not behaving in a way that is very loving to ourselves or others, it's just a simple way to put it, um, we learn to cooperate with the process of healing. In other words, instead of trying to avoid being triggered into feeling things that we don't want to feel because we're afraid we can't deal with them or that we don't have the resources to heal these issues, that starts turning around between 9 and 10. We start feeling like, oh my gosh, what I need more than anything in the world is to finish the business of healing my stuff, to update my software, and have my personal embodied self be fully aligned with this realization of infinite oneness. So then we start actually eventually seeking feedback, seeking to find what in me still is needing some healing. And then when the inevitable stuff is being shown, uh, we learn how to lean into it and embrace it and use it and allow ourselves to go through the process of feeling things we were afraid to feel, admitting things we were afraid to admit, um, apologizing to people we should have apologized to years ago, uh, learning how to be vulnerable, learning how to be humble, learning how to just be an undefended human being. So by the time we have that kind of disposition, we're moving deeply through stage 10. I think I'll stop and see if there's any questions here. And let me see how many people I can see at once on my screen. So go ahead and raise your hand if you have anything that you want to say or ask at this point. Okay, good. I mean, I shouldn't say good. I'm encouraging the questions, but all right, I will continue. So moving on to stage 10 here, transforming. The need is to thoroughly heal and realign our whole being with our realized unity. The quote I have is, owning our story can be hard, but not nearly as difficult as spending our lives running from it. That was from Brene Brown. And let's see, I got a ding like somebody's trying to come in, but the system isn't giving me a way to do that. Is it? Hang on one second. Here we go. Good. All right. Okay, welcome whoever came. So the other quote I want to put here around stage 10 is, we are not here simply to become awake. We awaken to fulfill our purpose through service to others. That's a direct quote from me, Ted. And the reason I put that quote out there is because there's a lot of, I think many of us who've been on the spiritual path for a long time um, have come to think that our purpose is to awaken. But from my experience, there's something much bigger. And that much bigger thing is to do what we're here to do and be. In other words, yes, we need to awaken. We need to awaken so we know who we are. And we know that we will not, our purpose will not be fulfilled unless we fulfill it, which starts to hint at stage 11. What drives the transition from stage 10 to stage 11 is that we've healed enough of the old wounds and conditioning that we start to emerge from that. And my experience of this was, I felt like, again, I'm an extreme example. This is not how most people feel it. But for me, it felt like I'd been hacking my way through a jungle with a machete for about uh, 30 years or something, and maybe more. And I eventually found myself standing in a clearing. And I was like, what? I never expected to actually get out of the jungle. I expected to be hacking my way at it for the rest of my life. And so coming out the other end for me was kind of a shock, but I think it then led me rather rapidly to the capacity to ponder, like, oh, okay. I mean, I don't know for sure that that's really over, but in case the bulk of it is, now what? What am I here for? What's the point of my life? And for me, it became clear in stages. Some things that I already knew about why I was here, which is to help awaken millions of people. But it became more and more clear exactly how. It was, what's my place in that purpose? What's my projects to do? What's my unique function? So stage 11 is very much about individuating, discovering who we are uniquely. So what drives that is getting through enough of the healing to be ready to go into this as a deep consideration. Now, it's not to say we haven't already done any of that. We've all had these questions for our whole life, probably, like, who am I? What am I doing here? So really, these things are just sort of like, okay, if you haven't gotten that really clear to this point, life will force the issue. One way or another, you will have experiences that signal to you, it's now time to make this very clear. Because if I don't know what I'm doing here, I don't know what to do. I don't know why I'm getting up every day. Why am I awake? Am I awake just to be awake? What do I do? So that's what drives the transition to stage 11. Um, Stage 11, individuating. The need here is to adjust to post-transformation life and to live your unique purpose or function. The reason I say purpose or function is because some people have difficulties thinking about having a purpose in life. Some people are more sort of being oriented and less doing oriented. So they might have difficulty thinking about purpose. But for these types, I find that using the word function helps, because we all have a thing that, just being ourselves is a function. When we're being ourselves with people, our being has an impact on them according to how we are wired up, how we're configured, how we were created, how we're designed. The more we can let ourselves be that function, the more we are just naturally fulfilling our purpose. Same thing. The identity here, so the need at stage 11. Oh yeah, I've got that. Okay, identities. At this point, we still have a sort of basic identity of I am everything, nothing, and me. But now it's more like um, I am that, finding my human uniqueness, my place. You could also say I am being everything, nothing, and me, finding my place in society is one way to put it. And while we're part of what's going on here is we're turning our attention in some ways less focused on the realization of consciousness and infinite being and more focused on how do I fit in? Is that spiritual? I don't know. It's just kind of a bunch of ideas about that. Even the ancient Zen ideas about how people grow eventually showed that the realizers go back to the marketplace and do their thing. That's really what this is about. Taking your realization into life and living it. And here's where some of the spiritual identities begin to crumble. It's like, oh, if I go back into the marketplace, is that going to make me less of a spiritual person? Do I have to be talking about consciousness and spirituality all the time if I'm going to be a spiritual person? What if I just go into business and make money? I mean, obviously, I'm going to do that to help people. That's really what's behind the make. That's that's it's like we make money because we're giving service. So at this stage, wouldn't expect anybody to be going back into the marketplace thinking, I'm just going to make a killing in this or that. I think you'd be finding that you will find yourself thinking, how do I love people and help them become who they are? How do I help them in their lives? And and how can I give them service? And how can I arrange it so that I'm being honored for what I'm giving, and we're all being honored around the circle here? Does that make us less spiritual because we're talking more about business or talking more about services and things like that? I certainly grappled with that a lot. I got to the place where it's like, actually, I was involved with a group that was really into working on our conditioning and our stuff. And I've been doing that for a year and a half or something like that, in addition to doing that in the Trillium context. And one day I'm like, I don't want to do this anymore. I just want to do my thing. And for me, it took a lot of courage to go back into that group and say, great group, you guys, it's been wonderful. But I don't want to do this anymore. I'm going to go do my thing. And at first it was like, what? You're getting off the program. And I had to explain that for me, that's not off the program. For me, the program is, it's not about me so much anymore. For me, the program is, it's about how I serve other people. So um, here's a quote. The hero in each of us is required to answer the call of individuation. This is from a guy named James Hollis. I don't even know who that is. I just found it on the internet somewhere, and it says a lot of what I'm trying to say in this stage 11 consideration. So I'm kind of on a roll. I'm going to keep going all the way through stage 14, and then we'll just stop and talk. I think that'll be easier. So, okay, so in stage 11, we are healed enough of our conditioning to find out who we are uniquely. And well, what follows from that is, okay, I'm seeing who I am uniquely. What am I doing with that? How do I live that? How do I embody that? How do I live my truth in the world? That gets us towards stage 12, living potential, in which you're living your potential. What stops us from living our potential? I had the perfect quote here, which disappeared. So I will have to call it up from memory. But it's basically, that one supposedly of Jesus from the Gnostic Gospels, I think the Gospel of Thomas. If you bring forth what is within you, it will heal you. If you don't bring it forth, it will destroy you. That is a perfect way of saying what happens as you move from stage 11 to stage 12. In stage 11, you discover what is within you that is trying to be revealed and to come forth. But the big issue that's in front of you is fear. What happens if I am being who I know myself to be? How will people not like me? How will people put me down? What bad thing will happen if I am true to myself? Now, that has been a question for a long time. But when you get to stage 12, you can't avoid it anymore. You are forced to confront it. And it comes, I think, the easy way to say what it comes down to at that point is you realize that you have fear of embodying your truth. But you also realize that the fear no longer has to stop you. You can feel fear and you can move forward. What moves you forward is the realization that what you don't bring forth is destroying you. You realize that you have to bring yourself forth. Your gifts have to come out to the world or it'll eat you alive from the inside. Your insides are basically saying, I know I'm not being myself. I know I'm not doing what I'm here to do. I it's killing me to not do that, but I'm scared. And at stage 12, it's like, right, I'm scared. Oh well, I'm going to do it anyway. And that brings us into passionately giving our gifts, letting our gifts just flow through us. And as we do so, we start to notice um, the parts of us that remain that are scared enough to keep trying to control stuff. It's like these, so maybe at this point, we're down to the bottom of the pile of stuff. Like when we got up to stage 11, maybe we were about 80% healed and updated. But by the time you're getting toward the middle to end of stage 12, you're living your potential, your gifts are coming through you, but you're still noticing um, parts of you that are trying to control your experience. And the universe will tend to issue a long series of challenges that basically say, oh, you think you're surrendered to what's trying to come through you? How about this? You going to surrender to this? And you get to go, oh my God, not this, not this. And then after a while, it's like, okay, why not this? Yes, okay, I'll surrender to this. And then you get another and another and another. And then after a while, well, one day I just sort of woke up and I realized that I was gone. And it's difficult to use language to describe this kind of experience, but the part of me that identified itself as a separate person who was being Ted, I don't know, it's very hard to describe. Another way to describe it is the narrative self for me just disappeared. The narrative self being, you know, that endless trail of thoughts that we tend to associate, that we tend to identify with because it takes so much of our space. That's the only reason we're identified with it. It's like in our space all the time, so we think it's who we are. It's just only a tiny fraction of who we are. And when you've gone beyond the surrender into just letting life flow right through you without any resistance, there's nothing left there to call itself a self. It doesn't mean the body isn't here. The body is here. The thoughts are still here. But we don't care about the thoughts the way we used to. We don't attach to things the way we used to. We don't identify with things the way we used to. Our need to have an identity itself evaporates. That whole impulse to have to be a person, which we obviously already are, but maybe the better way to say it is to reinforce that sense of self. That's what goes away. And one way to visualize this is that our energies have been deeply conditioned to be constantly checking back on themselves, self-reflecting. Am I okay? Is everything going to be okay? Am I doing the right thing? Am I saying the right things? Are people liking me enough? This is all like this energy. When you get beyond the surrender part, what has gotten you beyond that is service to the world. It's not about you anymore. You're just giving. You're giving yourself to the world. It's not, and then if one day you wake up and it's not you giving anymore, it's the universe giving through this space that you inhabit. So the self-reflecting comes to a halt. You get to this place where you see the mechanism and it doesn't matter anymore. You just put it down. You don't pick it up anymore. And you just keep living your life surrendered to what's happening, surrendered to what wants to come through, with no need to figure out anything else except how how to navigate the whatever challenges are right there in front of you in the present. So that's how we move from 12 to 13. And that is a new phase of life. Just like moving from the dual phase of life to the unified phase is a major shift. It's a game-changing shift. So the transition from phase 2 or unity into phase 3 singular is a game-changing shift because the platform is totally different at that point. It's not about me, how I'm going to grow myself, how I'm going to do this or that. It's just happening. So now we're getting up to 13, and I said I'd say something about the dissolution of subject-object perspective. When people talk about non-dual realization, here's a simple way to think of it. In the recognition of duality, or in basing our life in duality, one way to think of it is I am doing something, or I am experiencing something. In phase 3, the I disappears. So all that's there is the something, the objects, the actions, the experiences. All of a sudden it's non-dual because all there is what's happening. The illusion of a separate self that was making things happen or controlling experiences, it just vanishes and you're just left with what's happening. It's kind of that simple. And I'm hoping that by talking about it in that kind of a simple way, it'll help you to understand where we're headed long term. Because as far as I can tell, this is emerging as where humanity is going. This is where advanced realization takes us. Here's a quote. The personal life deeply lived always expands into truths beyond itself. Anais Nin. Truths beyond self, beyond self. And Rumi, when you lose all sense of yourself, the bonds of 1,000 chains will vanish. I think that's incredibly beautiful. It gives me chills to saying that. When you lose all sense of yourself, the bonds of 1,000 chains will vanish. Those bonds were really the bonds that we keep hearing in spiritual language of attachment to an illusory sense of self. When you get beyond that and you're just living and just surrendered and just giving, all that other stuff, you don't really even get to fully appreciate how heavy that was until you get beyond it. Just how you don't really, I don't think we get to appreciate how turbulent the search for wholeness is until we realize whole being, come to whole being realization. When we cross into whole being realization, things quiet down a lot. That whole engine of seeking, like the jet engines that are keeping us in the air all this time, when we finally land on the ground and the jet engines shut off, that's when you know how noisy it was. So just like that, when you land in singular realization, the turbulence of the attempt to control, that's when you get to see how heavy that was. So then there's just one more stage here, and then let's just have an open conversation about all this. And what your experiences are, and any questions you have. So the last stage in this model is stage 14. I see a stage beyond this, but I don't yet know how to test for it. So didn't want to try describing something I can't test for. But the stage is called flow. And I might be the first person to suggest that flow isn't just a state, because we hear of flow states all the time. But I'm here to suggest that flow is a stage, that the reason we have flow state experiences is because we're oscillating toward flow as a permanent stage. Here's a quote from Alan Watts, one of my favorites. "You're a function of what the whole universe is doing in the same way that a wave is a function of what the whole ocean is doing." It's beautiful, right? You can feel how being a wave is simply a part of the ocean. It's kind of just a wave function in the larger reality. That is a nice description of flow. In my experience, it just means, in a way, it's not even a positive thing. It's just the lack of the negative thing, which is resistance to flow. No matter what's up in our lives in any particular moment, doesn't mean we're going to like everything. We won't like everything. It just means we're not resisting what's true. If something comes up in us that basically says, I don't like this, there's nothing in our being that says, I'm going to resist not liking this. We just don't like it. That's all. No resistance to resistance. No secondary oscillation, or resistance, no reverberation. Just being what is, and no resistance to either positive motion or apparent negative motion or staccato or harmony, whatever quality is there. Doesn't matter what the quality is that's there. Doesn't matter if we're in horrible pain. There's just no resistance to the fact of what is, or the flow of being through our space. I think that's enough. I think I'm going to stop. That was a long rant, and I hope it had some meaning for you all. And I'm sure that there's going to be some questions about how this maybe relates to Trillium or your experiences. So please bring up any questions or comments that you may have.
That's perfect, Ted. May I jump in? Because just right now I have this question. I really appreciate your presentation. I have the book here. I'm reading right at those levels. And it does feel like a beautiful description of where I am, because I was just saying this morning earlier, my edge is not resisting, just really being with things. And I just typed it into the chat. When you say I won't like everything, that's really true. I have preferences, and I just assume this, and I'd really like that, and I'm not happy with this. And I'm observing that, I'm noticing it, and but that sure sounds like resistance to me. So my question was, what's the difference between not liking and resisting? I wonder if you can articulate. I kind of can feel into it a little bit, and I'm saying, yes, I'm saying that I have these experiences and I'm not resisting, but the very fact that I'm having them does feel at some level like resisting. So what can you say about that?
Great question. Great question. Let's see, I'll pick a simple example. You're in the grocery store and you see something you hate, which is, natural. These bodies all have their preferences. Everybody has its own. Some people love it. I love broccoli. My mom hated broccoli. And if I cooked it in the house, she would get nauseous. So my mom, might walk into the grocery and look at broccoli and go, ugh. And, I would walk into the grocery store and notice that, let's say I would look at something I don't like and just move right along.
That's so there's something about the moving right along. That's helpful. So not getting tangled, not starting to do a thing, not starting to second guess, talk, narrate about it, but
Right.
just noticing the experience of "Ugh." It could be about what's going to happen with Trump, or it could be about what's happening with one of my kids, or in my body, or my partner. I notice it, and then it flows. It doesn't go.
That's right. Right. And
That's
you're not attaching to any of those inner experiences or outer experiences.
okay. So the resistance is like a wall, and you keep you hit it, and you hit it again. And flow is you notice the eddy, the current, the wave, the crash, the boil, getting boiled in the white water, and you flow right on through it. That's going
Exactly.
to be very helpful for me. Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah. I mean,
Because I
Samuel,
do that sometimes, and sometimes I don't.
okay. All right. Samuel used to use the analogy of being in a canoe going down a river. And you could come up to some rocks, and somebody might go, "Oh, rocks! Oh my God, what if we die?" And get all tangled up in that. Someone else might go, "Oops, left." That's it. Yeah, I hope that's a.
Thank you. Yeah,
You can see
that's
how I
that. Yeah.
always prefer simple explanations. I
Hmm.
think they're easier to take in. Great question. Thank you, Joe. Anyone else? Yes, Bob.
Um, it seems at this point, the thing that I'm particularly attracted to is love and the evolution of my experience of love. What can you say about that in connection with this model?
Yeah. Thank you for that. I think that's a very important question because I think one of the standard detours in the spiritual ideas that we get is that we will all end up in some endless swoon of love. And um, some people do. That's what really is confusing, right? There's a certain way in which every person on this planet represents a unique dimension of being. And they will be the ultimate example of that dimension of being. So there are people who are just like so all about love, and your people who are around them feel the love, get awakened to love, and that's just the experience around those people. There are other people who that's not what they're here for. It doesn't mean they don't have love. They have love. I have love. I'm not a heart-based person. I'm a I'm more of a head-based person. I'm kind of an intellectual, and it's not that my experience of love hasn't greatly evolved. It really has. It's evolved tremendously. But I'm not I'm not going to go around hugging people, to give my transmission. That's just not my particular thing. Um, I'm much more comfortable behind the camera, doing my thing electronically. That's in my chart to do my teaching work electronically. Um, so I guess that's one thing to say. The people who are heart-based types will have a lot more heart-based experience. They will have maybe bigger experiences. They'll have more consistent stuff that they would put in the domain of love or heart and feelings. But say more. Is there more behind that?
Well, I think I would say my orientation is similar to yours in more an intellectual approach, but I'm really seeking a stronger connection with my heart, and as it starts to open up, I'm wondering if actually my woundedness had me put aside the fact that I'm really heart based. That's where I am.
Oh, wow. Well, uh, I think go following that and see how far it takes you. Right?
Okay.
What's the worst that happens if you go following your heart, and you might find out, okay, I've had enough of that after a while. at least for now. Or you might find out, oh my gosh, I am now remembering this horrific event that happened to me when I was 7 years old that really shut down my heart. And that's why I'm staying out of my feelings, to avoid that. Yeah, go follow all of that stuff. And this is one of the reasons why the disposition toward mutuality is so darned important, because we can't see ourselves very well. We need other people. We need to be in relationship with others. And we need to be in a society, a culture that values giving and receiving feedback in ways that feel safe and appropriate. So if we're, and that is one of the things that Trillium attempts to do, is to create a safe space for us to explore how we're impacting each other, what's going on in our relationships. That's one of the ways that we find out um, who we are. I mean, I was giving an example earlier today while Hillary and I do couples counseling, and I was giving this example of how one day I was talking to Hillary in the kitchen, telling her something I was pretty sure she wouldn't want to hear. And she said, I wasn't going to hurt you. And I like, what? Why did you say that? And she said, well, you flinched. I'm like, I just keyed right back to something I'd completely forgotten, which is that when I would say stuff to my mom as a kid that she didn't like, she'd smack me. And she did it enough that it was like completely built into my system. And I had no idea. And I wouldn't have known if Hillary hadn't reflected that to me. So that gave me an opportunity to become conscious of that, to embrace it, and to find ways of healing that. So if you suspect there's something in you that's tangled up somewhere, yeah, get into some situation, a group, a relationship where you can be truly authentic, speak your truth, be willing to hear what other people have to say about how you're affecting them or how they perceive you. Invite that kind of feedback. I mean, we all grew up in a world where everyone was heavily defending themselves from getting any negative feedback, violently defending themselves. I was doing that. It was that was really rough programming. So this is part of what I think we all have to heal.
That's interesting, because I'm really attracted to mutuality right now, which is also not the way I grew up.
Yeah. How many people grew up with a disposition toward mutuality? Raise your hand. Nobody. I don't see it. Let me go to the next page. Anybody raise their hand? Nobody raised their hand. Okay, that says a lot. Oh my God. We grew up in a world that I sometimes characterize as the world did not know the difference between love and violence. It was pretty severe. That's, in a way, it tells us something about how young human beings are in the larger evolutionary scheme, where, you know, on average, it's not very developed, but we're getting there. And once we get that, we can start going, oh, now it makes sense why I was conditioned the way I was, why it seems so hard to go there, why it's so scary. Yeah, the taboos are super deep.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. Yes, Dan. Dan, yeah.
Okay, there we go. Hi, I just wanted to mention too that Zoom has an option to see 49 people if you have a fast enough computer and a big enough screen.
Really?
If you go under video options and it's scrolled off the bottom, and then like, so you could see everybody anyway.
Cool, thanks.
There's so many little
you right now, but okay.
But I love your model, and it seems, I mean, it seems really helpful and useful for people to have a map, and to kind of know where they are on that map, and it kind of gives you a direction. And my question is, I've done some work with Jeffrey Martin. I know you know Jeffrey in the Finders course, and his whole location-based map, which is similar but different in that he says people can kind of jump from one to another and they move around, and it's not so much a progressive series of experiences. I mean, I love having to choose, I would pick yours. And I'm just wondering, in terms of your experience with working with so many people that you have, does it seem that people do generally kind of progress through these stages? Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I maintain, I've heard this argument many times, referring to Jeffrey Martin and his locations. And of course, it's true that there's this quantum effect, right? So there's some parts of us at different parts of the model at different times. But on average, how could we not be evolving? The whole universe is evolving. How could we not be evolving? That's my argument. And my experience is, yes, everybody evolves. Some people get to really difficult challenges that they don't know how to get beyond and don't even know that that's what's going on. So does that mean they're not evolving? I don't know. No, I think if you stand back far enough, you'll still see them evolving. It just may be hard to see. That's what I see. I don't see any evidence to the contrary. I think we're always evolving.
And in your experience, people generally go through these. I mean, I'm guessing that's what the research showed, and that's why you came up with this.
Exactly. Yeah.
Oh, so cool.
Dr. Griggs and I did a lot of research, and we also hired a bunch of people to keep digging into the research to make sure we weren't missing something.
Yeah.
We keep getting the message back. It's like, no, seems right. I mean, you're certainly at the forefront of the description of this stuff, but not seeing anything to counter the idea that this is on average what's going on.
Yeah.
If any of you see something else, please let me know. I'm not attached to this. I'm just trying to describe what I'm seeing.
Yeah, no, it's just so helpful. It's kind of like when this country was founded, beyond the Mississippi River or something, there were no maps. It's like you're on your own. And so this is like a map, into an area. I mean, a lot of, because most spiritual teachers, like, you're awake, you're not awake, and they don't, and there's some, that grow up, what is it, show up, whatever, the integral model. I'm really enjoying this. This is really helpful. So thanks.
Yeah, thanks. And by the way, I think when I did the earlier presentation last spring or summer about the iConscious model, I mentioned this, but I'll mention it again because many of you may not have heard that. The first model I encountered was enlightenment or ignorance. A very black and white model. And then there was ignorance, cosmic consciousness, God consciousness, unity consciousness. And then I pressed Maharishi and he started talking about Krishna consciousness. And so there's a few more stages. That's a little more nuanced. Of course, I had no idea really what those things were about, but that's part of what really propels me to come up with clear descriptions, because it's very easy to get confused, because there are so many different kinds of descriptions. So, people who've had big opening experiences who can talk about it, and we can get all kinds of ideas of what that means. And maybe a lot of what's going on there is they're representing one particular domain in a very unusual sort of way. And another person, I mean, I see this all the time. People go into spiritual works and they start comparing themselves with the teacher. The teacher has had this like marvelous, multi-dimensional, cosmic opening of some sort. And then the students think they should be having the same thing. And the teachers are measuring the students by that mark, and the students are measuring themselves by those markers. And especially when, the goals are not even very clear, then it all becomes very fuzzy. And it's like, wait, what are we doing again? Where are we going? Is that really where I'm going, or is that where you went? And I think it's very important to understand that that's why in the iConscious model, there's this big emphasis at stage 12 on you fully embodying your uniqueness. That's where this goes. And no one's going to look awake in the same way as anyone else is going to look away in that other person's way. Yeah. Anyway, did that respond to what you were after?
Oh, yeah, that's great. Yeah. The other interesting thing is that we can only kind of see things from where we are.
Yeah.
And that's why I think the map is helpful too, because it allows you in a way to have some vision maybe beyond where you are, or what's possible, kind of like Maharishi points to this, cosmic consciousness or whatever, but you have no idea what it is. But having a little description of that is, I think, really helpful. So yeah, that's
Absolutely.
good.
Totally. That's part of what motivates me.
Yeah, wonderful. Thanks.
Thanks, Dan. Anyone else want to say or ask? Oop, yeah, Kathleen.
You know about the resistance again, no resistance and being in the flow that way. I was thinking, so like so allowing resistance is not being in the flow in a sense, because to allow it, there has to be some resistance to it. You know what I
Perfect.
mean? Is that
That's
right?
just
Okay.
perfect. That's a better answer than I gave. Allowing resistance. I love that. It's beautiful.
Yeah, not
Right.
resist the resistance is the next step beyond not liking. I don't resist not liking. I don't resist my resistance to.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's like green lighting, isn't it?
Well, green lighting, we could say, is a practice that takes you there. Yeah, that's the idea. Exactly. Green lighting is like it or not, I'm going to embrace this. And that's what takes you in that direction.
Right. But in that direction. But when you're green lighting, you're still in a resistance if you have to allow it. If you know what I mean? Like, because
Yeah,
you know what I mean? That's what I mean. So, okay.
that's
Yeah,
right.
thanks.
That's right. But, all you can do at that stage is,
But that is a stage, yeah, to it. Yeah.
so you allow the fact that you have to allow your resistance in order to get to being beyond all of that.
Yeah.
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 I think that's one of the brilliant things that Samuel brought in. Because it's like, okay, how do I get out of this puzzle of resisting things that I don't like? And so many other approaches to spiritual realization give you all kinds of formulas for how to, like, stop resisting. But this is a positive thing. Embrace whatever it is. And it actually works. Yeah. So that was good. Thank you, Kathleen. Okay. Yes, Carolyn. You're still muted.
There we go. Just quickly, I like the expression relating to that. Say yes to no. Say yes to or no. Yes to,
Yes.
even
Yes.
to or no, we say yes.
Yeah. And I just want to point out that there's this subtle distinction between saying yes to our no, and that would be just on the stage 12 side of things. When you get to stage 13, there's none of that consideration.
Right.
If you paused long enough to have the consideration,
Right.
you're not yet at 13.
Yes. Talking about the state before that, when there is all this no, no, no.
Well, to whatever degree, stage 12 is sort of the last stage in which we get tangled up in the no,
Okay.
or the, not liking things.
Right.
Yeah, and then we still have to do some practice to overcome that or whatever. At 13, there's no, it's beyond surrender. It's not a practice. You're just living it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I see that we are very close to time. I think let's take one more thing if there's anything else. Anybody have something else to say or add? Or Van, is this all nicely aligned enough with Trillium Dharma?
The one thing I would say is I think you're looking at an integrated functionality with the realization, and I think we tend to, and Trillium just made me look at the realization, kind of like the cosmic consciousness, those stages, kind of more of that, and not necessarily linking it to relating and functionality in relationship and in the world. And then also just a kind of a technical point. Right now, the model that we're developing, and Trilly might say, is we're talking about whole being realization as what you said is, as initial whole being realization. And then there are additional, let's say early, middle, and advanced stages.
Yes.
Within the range of whole being realization. So we're not just looking at whole being realization as the second birth shift.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's a very useful model in terms of being yourself and being in relationship and service to the world. So it's all like woven together in an integrated way. So
yeah,
thank you very much for developing this.
Yeah. Oh, thanks. Thanks, man. Thanks for saying that. Okay, well, let me also then just say that I am going to start a 6-module class, a group that you're all invited to. It doesn't matter where you are on the model, you're invited. And it's going to be about stages beyond whole being realization. I'll just call it beyond whole being realization. Although nowadays you're saying, Van, you're making the whole thing whole being realization. So whatever, maybe I'll change the name, but that's what it's about. It's about these advanced stages of development. And I will send out an invitation to you all. And if anybody does not want to receive that, please opt out by sending me an email and telling me I'd rather not receive the invite. Otherwise, I'll just wait a few days and send it out. What else? I guess that's it. Thanks for all being here. Appreciate you all coming and giving me an opportunity to rant.
Thank you. It was beautiful.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ted.
Thanks.
Yeah,
Thank you all.
thanks everybody. Nice
Thanks
to
a
be
lot,
Love
Ted.
your ranting.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Lovely, thank you.
Love to you and Hillary.
Oh, thank you. Love to you.
Ted, if we're going to do the class, is it important that we have the book? Should we have the book?
Oh, sure. Why not? Let's go to the website and you'll see toward the bottom of the homepage, there's an offer where we'll give you the book for free. You just pay shipping.
Wow.
What's the website address?
iConscious.global.
Great.
And if you forget it, just email me and I'll tell you.
Great. Thank you.
Sure.
Looking forward to
Yeah, the
reading.
book's great. The book is really helpful.
it.
I'm enjoying it.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye,
everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.